poor mechanic risked his last $1,000 on a rundown garage. What he found inside changed his life. He was just a quiet mechanic with nothing left but a broken garage and a $1,000 gamble. She was a woman running from the noise of success, chasing the silence of her past. Neither of them knew that tucked beneath a dusty tarp in a forgotten hangar was a story waiting to take flight, one of loss, legacy, and a love that would rewrite their lives. This is not just a story about restoring an old airplane. It's about healing wounds across generations and discovering that sometimes the only way to move forward is to take to the sky. If you enjoy heartfelt, healing stories filled with unexpected twists and quiet, powerful romance, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single chapter of this journey. Now let's begin. The Hidden Wings. Lucas Walker stood in front of the old garage, keys trembling in his calloused hand. The December wind sliced through his worn denim jacket as he stared at the rusted "For Sale" sign still swinging from a nail on the post. He'd seen this building every day of his childhood, once a place of oil-stained pride where his father had fixed engines and dreams. Now it looked like it hadn't seen life in over a decade. A flock of crows rose from the roof with a loud caw as he stepped forward, boots crunching through brittle leaves. Lucas paused at the threshold, heart pounding. This is it, he told himself. $1,000, his last, gone in a blink. All on a garage that smelled like mildew and regret. He could have played it safe, rented a cheap room, waited tables, stretched the money thin, but something inside had whispered, go home. And here he was, 38 years old, back in the one town he'd sworn he'd never return to. The door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and engine grease long dried. Sunlight filtered in through cracks in the wooden siding, throwing sharp beams onto old tool chests and broken jackstands. A worn calendar hung crooked on the far wall. October 2008. He stared at it a moment longer than he expected. That was the year his father had the stroke, the year everything had fallen apart. Lucas let out a slow breath, the kind you take before diving into cold water. He began moving through the space, clearing cobwebs, opening windows, brushing dust off old counters. Somewhere in the back, he found the ancient coffee machine still sitting where it had always been. Out of habit, he plugged it in. It coughed but didn't light. Not yet. Then he saw it. A heavy tarp covered something large beneath a row of broken fluorescent lights at the far end of the garage. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Lucas hesitated. Curiosity pulled at him like a wire through his chest. He stepped closer, fingers grazing the rough, dust-coated fabric. With a sharp tug, he pulled the tarp away. A gust of dust exploded into the air, making him cough, eyes watering. But when it cleared, he blinked, then blinked again. Underneath lay the silver husk of an old airplane fuselage. Small, narrow-winged, its metal body dulled by time but unmistakably intact. It looked like a classic Piper Cub, or maybe a Cessna. He wasn't sure. What in the world was that doing here? Lucas circled it, running a hand along the cold aluminum body. One wing was half disassembled. The propeller looked frozen in place, but the body was whole. He found himself smiling, the first real smile in weeks. "Dad, what the hell were you doing with this?" he whispered. In the office corner, beneath a pile of invoices and water-stained boxes, Lucas found a small leather-bound notebook. Inside were faded sketches, measurements, notes written in his father's shaky hand. And on the inside cover, "For the man you'll become, not the boy I left behind. J. Walker." Lucas sat down hard on an overturned bucket. He hadn't spoken to his father in nearly a decade before the stroke. And even after, when the old man could barely move or speak, Lucas had only visited twice. There were too many words unsaid, too much hurt. But this plane, this message, it felt like a whisper from the grave. He spent the rest of the afternoon opening windows, letting light back into the bones of the place. Dust danced in sunbeams like restless ghosts. He swept the floors, cleared out broken parts, rearranged the tools. His hands moved with purpose, muscle memory from years long past returning like an old friend. The garage wasn't just a building. It was a chance to remember who he used to be. and maybe, just maybe, build something new. At sunset, Lucas stepped outside, wiping sweat and dust from his brow. The sky over the Rockies was painted in streaks of fire and lavender. The cold bit harder now, but his chest felt warmer somehow. He glanced back at the garage, at the silver glint of the plane barely visible inside. $1,000. All he had left. But maybe, just maybe, this place held more than rust and broken tools. Maybe it held redemption and hope. Lucas had barely slept. He'd spent most of the night on an old army cot in the back of the garage, listening to the creaks of wind against rotting wood, the occasional thud of something unseen falling in the dark. But his thoughts were louder than the noises, looping over the plane, the notebook, and the cryptic message his father had left behind. For the man you'll become. It echoed like prophecy, like a second chance wrapped in rust and rivets. By morning, the smell of coffee filled the air. A minor miracle, courtesy of a rebuilt percolator and some grounds he'd found stashed behind expired motor oil. He stood by the open garage door, watching the sleepy town stretch awake under a sky the color of cold steel. Then came the sound. It wasn't a bird or a breeze, but the distinct sputter of an expensive engine in distress. A silver coupe, German, low to the ground and definitely not built for mountain roads, rounded the bend and coughed to a stop right in front of the garage. Its hazard lights blinked twice like an apology. The door opened and out stepped a woman, mid-30s, dressed in a dark wool coat with buttons like brass coins, boots that cost more than Lucas had in his bank account, and hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun that somehow still looked elegant in the wind. She glanced at the garage, then at Lucas. "Is this place actually open, or just another abandoned shell with dreams?" she asked. Lucas blinked. Depends. Are you selling sarcasm or looking for help?" She arched an eyebrow. "Engine overheated. Warning lights started flashing about 10 miles back. I was told there was a garage up here. Didn't realize it came with commentary." Lucas fought back a smile. "Lucky for you, I'm better with engines than I am with charm." He walked over to the car, crouched beside the hood, and gently rapped on the front. "Pop it." She did. Steam hissed into the cold air. Lucas leaned in, adjusted a hose clamp with a practiced flick, then stepped back, rubbing grease on the side of his jeans. "You're running low on coolant and the radiator hose is cracked. Not a big fix, but you're lucky you stopped here. Another mile and you'd be stranded." The woman studied him, arms crossed. "Can you fix it?" He nodded. "If you give me a couple hours and don't mind drinking bad coffee in a dusty chair, sure." She hesitated. "Fine. But if I find a rat in my boot, I'm charging you for therapy." Lucas chuckled and led her into the garage. She took it all in with a glance. The cluttered workbenches, old photos on the wall, the cot in the back. Her eyes briefly caught on the plane, still partially shrouded in a tarp, its wing glinting softly under the filtered morning light. "What is that?" she asked, stepping closer. Lucas looked up from his tool chest. "An old plane. Found it under a tarp the day I moved in." She tilted her head. "Looks like a Cessna 140, maybe 120. Hard to tell without seeing the tail." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "You know your planes." She turned, her expression unreadable. "My grandfather was a pilot, taught me how to spot them before I could spell my own name." There was something in her voice then, a tightness, a shift, but it passed quickly. "I'm Lucas, by the way," he said, offering a hand. She shook it, firm and brief. "Claire Monroe." The name landed like a soft echo. He couldn't place it, but it felt familiar, like hearing a song you forgot you once loved. As the hours passed, Claire settled into the chair near the garage's front window. She took out her phone, but reception was patchy at best, so she ended up watching Lucas work. He moved with quiet focus, sleeves rolled up, the muscles in his forearms working like clockwork. "You grew up here?" she asked. Lucas nodded. "Born and raised. Left after high school. Came back a few weeks ago when, well, let's just say life circled me back." "In the garage?" "It was my dad's. He passed a few years back. I just bought it back with the last of my savings." Claire's brow lifted slightly. "That's either noble or insane." Lucas grinned. "Some days I'm not sure which." A silence settled between them, not awkward but curious. Claire's eyes drifted again to the plane. You plan to restore it? Lucas followed her gaze. I'm thinking about it. Found a journal in the cockpit. Belonged to a pilot named Jack Monroe. Claire's face went still. Lucas noticed. Any relation? She didn't answer right away. Then softly, he was my grandfather. The air between them shifted, like something unseen had cracked open. Lucas straightened, suddenly unsure. I didn't mean to. No, Claire interrupted. It's surprising. He disappeared when I was little. No one ever really knew what happened, only that he'd left behind a trail of rumors and an old photo album. She stepped closer to the plane, hand brushing the metal skin. I never imagined I'd see anything of his again. Lucas studied her for a moment. There was no doubt now. This was more than coincidence. This was something rare, fragile, fated. He cleared his throat. Maybe you'd like to read the journal? Claire hesitated. Her eyes looked brighter somehow, but she nodded. Yes, I would. And just like that, the cold space between two strangers began to warm. Not with fire, but with memory, with chance, and with something that felt eerily like the start of a story neither of them had planned to tell. Lucas wiped his hands on an old cloth as Claire sat quietly at the workbench, the journal resting between them like a sacred relic. The leather cover, cracked and darkened with age, looked out of place against the cold metal and grease-stained tools that surrounded it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Outside, wind rustled through bare branches and the sound of a train horn drifted in from far beyond the valley. Lucas finally broke the silence. I haven't read much, just a few pages. Figured it wasn't really mine to read. Claire nodded, her fingers grazing the spine. He disappeared when I was 7. One day he was just gone. My mother said he was chasing ghosts in the Rockies. I never knew what that meant. Lucas leaned back against the counter. Maybe this will help explain it. Claire opened the cover gently, revealing the first page, a line of neat slanted handwriting. To whoever finds this, you've stumbled upon more than bolts and wings. You found what kept me flying long after the engine stopped. She turned the pages slowly, each one revealing drawings, calculations, and reflections that oscillated between mechanical and poetic. It was the diary of a man who saw flying as more than travel. It was salvation, escape, freedom, and something else, guilt. As she read, her brow furrowed. Lucas could almost see the weight of each word settling on her shoulders. Jack Monroe, she murmured. He always seemed like a myth, a man my mother talked about in half-finished sentences. She never forgave him for leaving. Lucas offered her a cup of coffee, which she took wordlessly, eyes still on the journal. Do you mind if I... She gestured toward the plane. He shook his head. Go ahead. Claire stood and stepped carefully around the boxes and tools until she was face to face with the aircraft. She rested her hand on the cold metal skin, almost reverently. Why would he leave a plane here? She asked, half to herself. Lucas crossed his arms. That's the part I can't figure out. My dad never mentioned it. But judging by the dust, it's been here a long time. She turned, eyes thoughtful. My grandfather was a bush pilot. Flew across Alaska, Montana, Colorado. Said the sky was the only place that made sense after the war. Lucas tilted his head. What war? Vietnam. He flew supply missions, sometimes evac. Came back with more silence than medals. He used to say the sky was quiet. No questions up there. Lucas looked toward the ceiling, trying to imagine a man like Jack Monroe building a life in this very garage. Maybe this was where he tried to find peace. Claire's voice softened. He was looking for something, maybe redemption. A gust of wind pushed through the open garage door, flipping a page in the journal. Claire returned to it, scanning a paragraph, then stopped. Here, she whispered. Listen to this. She read aloud. Walker has the hands of an artist and the silence of a priest. I trust him. If I don't make it back, I hope he keeps this plane safe. Maybe finishes what I couldn't. I can't carry both burdens forever. Lucas's breath caught. Walker, that's my dad. Claire looked up. You're sure? He nodded slowly. He was never much for company, but he had a way with machines. He used to fix anything with wings. I guess he helped your grandfather. The realization settled over them like fresh snow. Their fathers, or in Claire's case, grandfather, had crossed paths, built something together, trusted each other, and then, for reasons still hidden in the folds of time, the story stopped. Claire closed the journal and held it tightly in her lap. This feels bigger than either of us. Lucas gave a small smile. Feels like it found us, not the other way around. A beat passed. You thinking about staying? He asked, almost casually. She glanced toward the door. I was supposed to be in Aspen tonight. Business meetings, board members to impress. But now, she looked back at the journal. Now I feel like if I leave, this might disappear again. Lucas nodded. There's an inn at the edge of town. It's not fancy, but the coffee's decent, and the owner talks too much. Claire raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a trap. He grinned. Only if you hate homemade pie. She smiled for the first time, genuinely, without armor. I'll consider myself warned. As she stood to leave, she paused in front of the plane again. Do you really think it could fly again? Lucas walked over, joined her. The frame's intact. Wings need rebuilding. Engine might be salvageable. It won't be easy, but with time and patience, yeah, I think it can fly. Claire nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the fuselage. Then maybe we should try. That night, as Lucas locked the garage door behind him, he felt something he hadn't in years. Not just hope, but purpose. There was still so much he didn't know, so much Claire hadn't said, but something had shifted between them, like two compass needles swinging quietly into alignment. Up above, the sky stretched wide and cloudless, and somewhere in the silence, Lucas swore he could hear the faint hum of an old propeller, still turning, still waiting. The next morning arrived with the kind of stillness only winter could bring. A faint layer of frost glazed the windows of the old garage, painting the glass with delicate veins of white. Lucas stood by the workbench, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, staring at the aircraft that now seemed far less like a relic and more like a challenge issued straight to his soul. Claire arrived just after 8, the tires of her rental crunching across the gravel driveway. She stepped out wearing a thick parka and holding 2 cardboard cups. I figured you'd already be up, she said, offering one. He accepted it with a small nod. You figured right. This place doesn't let you sleep in. Claire walked past him toward the plane, her breath rising in soft clouds. I couldn't stop thinking about it last night. The journal, the plane, the way he wrote about your father like they were more than just mechanic and pilot. Lucas joined her. They probably were. I think they both had things to hide, or maybe things they didn't know how to talk about. She traced the curve of the wing with her gloved fingers. Do you think he ever wanted me to find this? I don't know, Lucas said honestly. But I think if he didn't, he wouldn't have left the journal where someone could. Claire stood silently for a moment. Then with a decisive breath, she turned to him. Let's restore it. Together. Lucas raised an eyebrow. You serious? She met his gaze, steady. He trusted your father to keep it safe. I want to trust you to help bring it back. Lucas chuckled, a dry sound more from disbelief than humor. I'm not exactly running a certified aircraft restoration shop here. No, she said, but you're the one who found it. You have the tools. And this town seems to need something to believe in. He considered that. So do we. Claire held out her hand, gloved but firm. A pact then? Lucas hesitated, then shook it. A pact. The following days took on a rhythm that surprised them both. Claire extended her stay, renting a room at the Sun Hollow Inn, where the owner, an exuberant widow named Marlene, insisted on feeding her cinnamon rolls the size of dinner plates and asking far too many questions about her handsome mechanic friend. Every morning, Claire arrived at the garage with coffee and a notebook. While Lucas worked with tools and grit, she dove into the technical schematics her grandfather had left in the journal, deciphering part numbers, airframe diagrams, and maintenance logs with surprising fluency. You're better at this than I expected, Lucas remarked one afternoon as she correctly identified a corroded rudder linkage and found its replacement code in under 2 minutes. Claire shrugged. I studied aerospace engineering for about a year. Then I switched to business when I realized I liked designing companies more than wings. Guess the wings found you again anyway, he said. She smiled at that. They worked side by side, often in silence but never uncomfortable. Lucas found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way her brow furrowed when she read. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The way she treated the plane like it was sacred. She, too, began to notice things. The way he hummed under his breath while sanding metal. The precision in his movements. The sadness in his eyes that hadn't yet been named. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the mountains and cast amber light through the garage windows, Claire sat back inside. I forgot how satisfying it is to build something real. Lucas handed her a water bottle. Better than spreadsheets. She laughed, soft and genuine. Infinitely. A beat passed. Then she said, tell me something about your dad. Lucas blinked. It wasn't a demand, but it wasn't casual either. It was an opening. He loved flying, he said slowly. Never got his license, though. Spent years fixing planes for other people. Said his hands were meant for engines, not controls. She listened intently, quiet. He used to bring me here on Saturdays, gave me a wrench, and told me to make friends with the bolts. I thought it was some kind of magic spell. Claire smiled. Sounds like he had a poetic streak. Only when talking about machines. With people, he was closed off, especially after Mom left. Her smile faded. What happened? Lucas hesitated, then exhaled. She couldn't take the silence anymore. Said the garage was his first love, and there wasn't enough left for her. Claire looked down, fingers tightening around the bottle. I know that feeling. Lucas studied her, but didn't press. That night after she'd gone, Lucas sat alone in the garage. The plane gleamed faintly under the overhead lights, its skin slowly returning to life. He ran his hand along the side. I don't know what you were trying to fix, he murmured to the air, but maybe we're all trying to rebuild something. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and quiet, like memories returning. The garage had changed, not just in appearance, though the cleared space and organized tools spoke volumes, but in atmosphere. The dust no longer felt like decay. It felt like history being honored. The cold had lost its edge, replaced by a quiet warmth that came not from a heater, but from human presence. Lucas noticed it most in the quiet moments. When Claire leaned over a schematic with her brows knit in focus. When she reached absently for the same wrench he did, and their hands brushed. When she hummed a tune under her breath while cataloging old parts. It was subtle but unmistakable. Something had shifted between them, even if neither was quite ready to name it. That afternoon, they worked in tandem as usual. Lucas was elbow deep in the left wing's interior structure, inspecting the spars for signs of corrosion, while Claire knelt nearby with the manual, cross-referencing torque specifications. Hey, she said, not looking up. What does it mean when there's a rivet line that breaks symmetry on a wing panel? Lucas peered over. Usually a field repair. Why? She rotated the diagram toward him. This one doesn't match the factory specs. Looks like someone patched the wing mid-service. Lucas studied the drawing, then the actual plane. Sure enough, one row of rivets curved ever so slightly off the norm. He hadn't noticed before, but now it was obvious. That's not factory work, he muttered. It's a field fix, all right. Which means, Claire finished the thought. The plane was damaged in flight. Lucas stepped back. But there's no incident report, no mention in the logbooks. Claire looked thoughtful. Maybe it was off the books. Lucas's gaze met hers. You think your grandfather was flying under the radar? Claire hesitated, then nodded. If he was running missions for people he didn't want listed, it would make sense, especially after the war. A lot of former pilots got pulled into gray areas. Lucas didn't press, but the idea unsettled him. This wasn't just about restoring a plane anymore. It was about uncovering what it had carried. Secrets, regrets, maybe sins. Later that day, they sat outside the garage on the tailgate of Lucas's truck, sipping black coffee from thermoses, their breaths clouding in the crisp mountain air. Claire was quiet, staring off toward the distant hills. You ever wonder, she said softly, if the people we come from ever really leave us? Lucas turned to her. All the time. She gave a half smile. My mother hated talking about my grandfather, said he abandoned the family for the thrill of the sky, that he wasn't a hero, just a man who ran away when things got hard. Lucas listened. She was so certain of that, I started believing it too. But then I found this journal, and now I don't know what to believe. Lucas leaned back. Maybe he was both, a hero and someone who ran. Claire looked at him, eyes sharp. You think both can be true? I think most people are more than one thing. Good, flawed, trying. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I didn't speak to my mother for nearly a year before she died, Claire confessed. We fought about the past, about legacy. I wanted to honor it. She wanted to bury it. Lucas's voice was gentle. And what do you want now? Claire took a long breath, then exhaled. I want to understand him, not the myth, not the man in the photo albums, the real person, the one who trusted your father, the one who wrote about regret and repair. Lucas nodded, his voice low. You might be closer than you think. They sat in silence again, watching the sky blush into gold as evening approached. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the air promised it wouldn't be long. The next morning, Lucas arrived early. Claire was already there, inside the garage, sorting through a stack of old storage boxes that had once belonged to his father. Couldn't sleep, she said by way of greeting. Lucas nodded. Coffee's brewing. She pulled out a sealed envelope from one of the boxes, worn but intact, with his father's handwriting scrawled on the front. Jack. Claire's breath caught. Lucas opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. Jack, the wing held. I hope you did too. I kept my word. I didn't tell them. But this plane, it's your story now. You decide how it ends. Joe Walker. Claire stared at the note, eyes wide. He knew, she whispered. My grandfather must have told him everything. Lucas folded the letter gently. Whatever he was running from, your grandfather trusted my dad to keep it safe. And now he's trusted you. The weight of it all pressed down. Generations of silence, of secrets buried beneath rivets and rust. And now 2 people who hadn't known each other a week ago, standing on the threshold of something far bigger than restoration. Claire looked at Lucas, eyes glossy but steady. We can't stop now. We won't, he said, but we have to be ready for whatever's still hidden. She nodded. Then unexpectedly she reached out. Just a light touch to his arm, brief but warm. Thank you, she said. Lucas swallowed the lump rising in his throat. For what? For not asking me to run from it. The first flakes fell just after dusk, soft, slow, and hesitant, as if winter were testing the boundaries of its arrival. By the time Lucas stepped out to lock the garage for the night, the snowfall had thickened into a quiet curtain of white. The forecast had warned of a storm, but out here in the valley, forecasts were more suggestion than certainty. He glanced toward the road. Claire's car was still parked near the tree line, dusted in snow. Inside the garage, she was gathering her things when he returned, notebook tucked under one arm. You might want to stay a little longer, Lucas said, brushing snow off his jacket. Roads are starting to get slick. Claire looked up. How bad? He peered out again. Bad enough to strand you halfway to town with no cell service. She hesitated, then sighed. Well, I suppose I've spent the night in worse places. Lucas cracked a smile. High praise. They moved together around the garage, adjusting the portable heaters, closing off the back windows, and laying out an old quilt on the worn leather couch Claire had jokingly referred to as prehistoric earlier that week. Lucas stoked the small wood stove near the workbench, its fire throwing flickering amber shadows across the hangar walls. By the time they settled in, the garage felt like a different world. Enclosed, quiet, suspended in warmth and drifting snow. Claire sat cross-legged on the couch, still in her coat, holding a mug of coffee that steamed faintly in the chill. Do you ever miss it? She asked. Miss what? The before, when things weren't complicated. Lucas leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. I'm not sure I ever had a before like that. She smiled softly. Touché. Silence stretched between them, easy but full. Lucas broke it. What about you? What made you leave New York? Claire stared into her mug. I told myself it was work. Expansion project in Denver. Short term. But that was just the excuse. He waited. I was drowning, she admitted. Not in failure. Ironically, I was successful. Promotions, praise, bonuses. but none of it meant anything anymore. My apartment felt like a hotel. My inbox never stopped. I woke up one morning and didn't recognize my own life. Lucas studied her quietly. My mother passed last year, she continued. Cancer, fast, unexpected. We hadn't spoken in months. She looked up, her voice tight. We fought about my grandfather, about whether he deserved to be remembered. I wanted to know him. She wanted to forget. Lucas sat on the edge of the workbench. And now you're here, with his plane. Claire exhaled. I keep wondering if it's too late. Too late to make things right. To understand him, her, me. Lucas took a moment, then said softly, it's never too late to look for the truth. And it's never too late to forgive. She nodded slowly, then leaned back, her gaze drifting upward to the metal rafters. This place, it's not what I expected, she said. How so? It feels honest, like it has nothing to prove. Lucas smiled. That's a kind way of saying it's falling apart. No, she said. It's exactly the opposite. It's holding together, maybe not perfectly, but enough. And that's more than I can say about a lot of places I've lived. A gust of wind rattled the walls. Snow pressed against the garage doors in waves, muffling the outside world. They were alone in a cocoon of steel and memory, of firelight and silence. Lucas got up and walked over to the aircraft. He ran a hand along the fuselage where the aluminum skin caught the firelight. I keep thinking about what your grandfather wrote, he said, about flying being the only place that made sense. Claire watched him. You think that's true? He nodded. For some people, sure. Up there, everything's reduced to lift, drag, and trust. You make decisions, you adjust your course, you keep flying. Claire stood and walked toward him, stopping beside the plane. Maybe that's why he disappeared. Maybe he thought the sky would forgive him. Lucas turned to her, his voice low. And do you? She looked at him, truly looked, past the grease-stained flannel, the tired eyes, the guarded strength. Something flickered across her expression, a tremor of vulnerability she rarely let show. I think I want to, she whispered. Their eyes held. Then, without ceremony, she leaned her head gently against the curve of the wing, her hands bracing the cold metal. I wish I could remember his voice, she said. Just once. The way he said my name. Lucas stepped closer, just enough for her to feel his presence. Sometimes, he said, it's not the sound we remember. It's the feeling. Claire closed her eyes. I feel it now, she said. When she turned to him, their faces were only inches apart. Neither moved. The moment stretched, long and full, then passed like the hush before a snowfall. She stepped back, clearing her throat. We should get some sleep. Lucas nodded, his voice rough. Yeah, probably a good idea. They parted without touch, without words, but with a quiet understanding settling between them. That night, as Claire lay wrapped in the old quilt and Lucas dozed in the chair near the stove, the storm raged on outside. But inside the hangar, something had shifted again. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet knowing, building like the first hum of an engine long forgotten, ready at last to wake. Claire awoke to stillness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a soft white hush across the world. From the window of the garage's office loft, she could see the valley blanketed in snow, untouched, serene, as if time itself had slowed during the night. Lucas was already up, tending to the stove, his breath curling in the morning chill. He gave her a nod as she descended the steps, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Morning, he said, handing her a warm mug. Thanks, she murmured, the coffee heating her fingers more than her body. How bad is it out there? Roads are snowed in, but the plows will be by soon. You should be able to get back to town by noon. Claire nodded. There was a tension in her chest this morning she couldn't name. Something tight and uneasy, like a warning she hadn't yet heard. They spent the morning cataloging parts in the back office, sorting through the remnants of Lucas's father's world, boxes filled with aviation manuals, ledgers, photos, and hand-drawn diagrams yellowed with age. Claire worked in focused silence while Lucas scanned barcodes and entered notes into his dusty laptop. Found another journal, Lucas said after a while, holding up a leather-bound book, thinner than the one from her grandfather. Claire reached for it instinctively, flipping through the pages. It was more technical, notes on propeller pitch, torque values, parts ordered and canceled, but something inside made her stop. Tucked between two pages was a photograph. Her breath caught. The picture was old, creased, faded at the edges. Two men stood in front of a small aircraft, smiling. One was unmistakably Jack Monroe, his pilot's jacket unzipped, goggles hanging around his neck. The other was a younger man, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, with dark hair and the same furrowed brow as the man now standing across from her. Lucas's father. Claire turned the photo over. In pen, faded but legible, were the words, Walker and Monroe, Mission, Bush 11, May 1974. Where did this come from? She asked, voice quieter than she intended. Lucas took the photo, frowning. That's my dad. And your grandfather. Her eyes met his. They flew together? I didn't know, he admitted. He never talked about it. Claire stared at the photo. Something clicked in her memory. An old conversation, hushed and half forgotten, between her mother and a man she never met. Words like desertion and debt whispered with shame and bitterness. She flipped through more of the journal. At the back, in neat, deliberate handwriting, she found a list. Mission dates, coordinates, and one line, circled in red. Monroe did not return. Blamed on Walker. Unconfirmed. Her hands went cold. Lucas, she said slowly, I think your father was the last person to see my grandfather alive. He looked at her, startled. What do you mean? She handed him the journal. He read the note, his jaw tightening. This doesn't make sense. My dad never talked about flying. He never even left the state after 76. Claire stepped back. Her voice trembled now. My mother always said he was betrayed, that someone left him behind. I thought it was just anger. But this feels like confirmation. Lucas shook his head. You think my dad, what, abandoned him? I don't know, Claire said, the words unraveling. But he never came home, Lucas. He disappeared. And this suggests your father might have had something to do with it. Lucas's face hardened, but his voice stayed calm. You said yourself you wanted the truth. This is one page, one interpretation. We don't know the full story. Claire's eyes were glassy. No, we don't. But now I have to wonder what else has been hidden in this garage. What else was left unsaid? Lucas reached for her arm, but she pulled away. I need time, she said, grabbing her coat and keys. The snow crunched under her boots as she walked swiftly to her car. Lucas followed her to the edge of the driveway, but he didn't stop her. He couldn't. The days that followed felt hollow. Lucas kept the garage open but barely touched the plane. The journal remained on the workbench, its last page still folded open, daring him to read it again. Marlene from the inn asked where Claire had gone. Back to the city, Lucas muttered. Said she had work to catch up on. But the truth settled deeper. She had gone because something between their fathers, between their histories, had cracked what they were building. He tried to write her once, tried to explain, but each time the words felt insufficient. Too many unknowns, too many ghosts. In the quiet of the hangar, he replayed every moment, her laughter by the fire, the way she traced her fingers across the plane's wing, the look in her eyes when she first read the journal. He missed her, not just her presence, but the way she'd begun to fill the spaces inside him he didn't know were empty. Meanwhile, in a hotel room overlooking a snow-covered Denver skyline, Claire sat at a desk cluttered with papers she couldn't focus on. The city pulsed below her, alive and detached. The photo lay in front of her, beside her grandfather's journal. She'd read the circled line 100 times, willing it to make sense, willing it to accuse or absolve, just something definitive. But it didn't. Instead, it raised more questions. She pulled out the letter Lucas had included with the photo, the one she hadn't read the day she left. Her fingers hesitated, then unfolded it. Claire, I don't know what that journal meant to you, or what it meant to your mother. I don't know what my father did or didn't do. But I do know this. He wasn't perfect. He was quiet, stubborn, and held on to guilt like it was a part of his identity. Maybe there's truth in those pages. Maybe not. But you and I, we're not them. And what we've started, it doesn't have to end here. Claire stared at the page. Outside, snow began to fall again, like a whisper from the mountains calling her back. The garage had grown cold again, It wasn't just the wind seeping through the old siding or the temperature that dropped with each passing sunset. It was the stillness, unnatural, heavy, like something waiting to be mourned. The heaters hummed, but they didn't chase away the emptiness Claire had left behind. Lucas sat on a stool near the plane, its exposed framework lit by the flicker of a lone halogen lamp. His hands rested on his knees, grease smudged across his palms like bruises. He hadn't touched the plane in 3 days. He couldn't. Her voice still lingered in the space, sharp, wounded, pulling his father's ghost from the corners where Lucas had kept him buried. Every word she'd spoken had been a blade honed by uncertainty, not malice, but it had cut all the same. The journal lay open on the workbench. The photo rested beside it. Lucas stared at them both like they were riddles he couldn't solve. He wanted to be angry. At Claire, at her assumptions. But beneath it, deeper than the sting of her leaving, was something else. Doubt. Had his father really abandoned a man in the sky? He thought of his childhood, of the way Joe Walker used to fall silent when old war movies played, how he never answered questions about what he did before the garage, the bitterness that crept into his eyes when the word pilot came up. Lucas had always assumed his father's silence was shame over not becoming one, but maybe the shame was something else entirely. He stood restless and walked to the back of the garage. There, hidden behind a stack of tires and an old compressor, was a metal trunk he'd never dared open. The key still hung on a rusted nail, untouched since the day he'd inherited the place. He opened it. Inside were documents, military records, repair logs, and envelopes addressed to names Lucas didn't recognize. At the bottom was a manila folder. He opened it slowly. There, clipped to a yellowing report, was another photo. This time only one man stood beside the plane, Jack Monroe. His smile was crooked, eyes squinting against the sun. Below the image, a handwritten note in familiar script. Final solo flight. Joe stayed behind to repair second fuel line. Lucas swallowed. So Joe had stayed behind. But there was more. An after-action report detailing a communication error during a supply run in '74. The plane had gone down in a remote canyon, never recovered. The pilot presumed dead. Witness, Jay Walker. Lucas sat back on his heels. His father hadn't left Monroe behind. He'd stayed behind, possibly to give the plane a chance to fly. But he'd never told anyone, never defended himself, never tried to clear his name. Why, Lucas thought? Why would he carry that guilt in silence? Unless it wasn't guilt, it was grief. He stood and looked at the plane once more. It wasn't just a machine. It was a tomb, a truth buried under aluminum and rivets. And Claire, she needed to see it, to know. But she was gone, and Lucas had no way of knowing if she'd ever come back. Across the mountains, Claire sat on the edge of her hotel bed, laptop open, her fingers idle above the keyboard. Her return to Denver had been mechanical. Meetings, emails, presentations delivered with perfect efficiency and zero heart. Her colleagues applauded her professionalism, unaware of the storm inside her chest. But she hadn't stopped thinking about the garage, the way it smelled of sawdust and fuel, the quiet strength in Lucas's voice, the way the plane seemed to hum even when no one touched it. And the letter. She'd read it again last night, and again this morning. "We're not them," Lucas had written, "and what we've started doesn't have to end here." But what had they started? She thought she'd come to Colorado to escape, to find clarity, closure, maybe purpose. Instead, she'd found a man who challenged her silence, a plane that carried the ghosts of her family, and a truth that refused to stay buried. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail. She stared at the number. Local, unfamiliar. She hit play. "Miss Monroe, this is Thomas Garvey with the Colorado Veterans Historical Society. I believe you called last week requesting records on Jack Monroe and Joseph Walker. I found something you may want to see. It's a signed statement from 1982. We've scanned and emailed it to the address you left. It'll be under Monroe Incident Addendum. Let us know if you have questions." Claire scrambled for her laptop, fingers trembling. She opened the email. There it was. A scanned, handwritten affidavit from Joseph Walker, dated 8 years after Monroe's disappearance. "Jack and I argued before the mission. He wanted to push the engine despite a known leak. I told him it wasn't ready. He insisted, said it was too important to delay. I stayed behind to fix the backup fuel line. I never saw him again. At the bottom, in bold print, I accept responsibility for not stopping him, but I did not abandon him. Claire closed her eyes. He hadn't betrayed her grandfather. He tried to save him. Her chest tightened with emotion, shame, relief, sorrow, and underneath it all, a need to go back. By the time Claire's rental pulled into the garage driveway, the sun was low, casting gold across the snow. Her breath fogged as she stepped out, heart racing. The door was open. Inside, Lucas sat on a stool, head bowed, hands covered in grease. The plane behind him gleamed under new lights, its wings partly rebuilt, the cockpit windshield newly cleaned. He looked up, startled. Claire stood in the doorway, wind at her back, hair tousled from the drive. "I got your letter," she said softly. Lucas rose slowly, uncertain. "And you came back," she nodded. "Because I needed to say I was wrong, about your father, about what I thought I knew." He said nothing, but his shoulders softened. Claire stepped forward, placing the affidavit on the workbench. "I found this. He wrote it. He tried to protect him. He stayed behind." Lucas looked down, eyes misted. "I always wondered what he was carrying." Claire's voice broke. "Now I know, and I'm so sorry I doubted you." Lucas walked around the bench, stopping just inches from her. "You didn't just doubt me," he said gently. "You ran." "I was scared," she whispered. "I didn't know how much I wanted this, how much I wanted to stay." A long silence passed. Then Lucas reached out and took her hand. "Then don't run again." Claire nodded, tears brimming. "I won't." And just like that, something long buried took its first breath, fragile but alive. The engines of the past had died, but something new was beginning to hum. The wind had calmed by morning. A delicate hush rested over the valley, broken only by the rhythmic chirp of birds and the creak of metal shifting under frost. Inside the garage, warmth from the wood stove made the air thick with the scent of pine smoke and old oil. Claire stood at the workbench, her fingers grazing the edge of the envelope Lucas had left for her weeks ago, the one she hadn't been ready to open. Until now. Lucas moved quietly around the plane, tightening bolts along the fuselage, giving her space. He hadn't asked what brought her back in detail, nor had she offered more than a few words. But their silence had changed. It was no longer distance, but understanding. Claire unfolded the letter with care, the paper worn and yellowed from time. The handwriting inside was unmistakable, sharp, purposeful, her grandfather's. "Claire, if you're reading this, it means the plane found its way back into the light. And maybe so did I. I won't pretend to be the man your mother wanted me to be. I've done things I can't explain. Some I can't justify. But this plane, this project, it was the one good thing I could try to finish before the past caught up with me." Claire's throat tightened. "I left not because I stopped loving your mother or you. I left because I believed I could do something worth remembering. The missions I flew, they weren't always official. They weren't always clean, but they saved people. That's what I told myself anyway. Joe tried to stop me that day. He knew the plane was weak. I wouldn't listen. And when things went south, he bore the blame in silence. I never wanted that for him." Claire paused, the sting of tears rising as she glanced toward Lucas. He continued working, unaware that his father's memory was being restored one line at a time. "I never expected forgiveness. I only hoped one day someone would understand that flying wasn't escape. It was the only place I could see clearly. Maybe now you do too. If this letter found you, then you've made it here. Maybe you met the man whose father held on to this machine all those years. If so, trust him. He's carrying more than you know. Just like I did. Just like we all do. Don't let silence become your legacy, Claire. Speak what needs to be spoken. Fly when you can. And never walk away from something that still has wings. With love always, Grandpa Jack." She folded the letter with trembling hands and pressed it to her chest. For the first time in years, the weight between memory and forgiveness began to lift. Lucas looked up from the engine. Their eyes met. Without a word, Claire walked over and handed him the letter. "I think he wanted you to read it too." Lucas took it gently, his jaw working as he absorbed each word in silence. When he finished, he set the letter down reverently. He trusted you, Claire said softly. Lucas nodded. And your grandfather, he wanted you to know he never stopped loving you. Claire looked away, blinking rapidly. I always thought he just disappeared, like we weren't enough reason to stay. You were, Lucas said. That's why he wrote this, so you'd know the truth, even if he couldn't say it in person. She nodded, swallowing hard. I wish my mother had read this. Maybe she could have forgiven him. Lucas's voice was gentle. Maybe she couldn't, but that doesn't mean you can't. Claire closed her eyes, breathed in the scent of the hangar, of smoke and steel and something impossibly human. She opened them again and looked at the plane. We have to finish it, she said. Lucas smiled. We will. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked with new purpose. Lucas handled the mechanical systems, fuel lines, avionics, electrical rewiring, while Claire took over the restoration of the interior, matching the cockpit layout to the original specifications found in her grandfather's notes. They argued over rivet placement, laughed over old aviation slang, and slowly found their rhythm again. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of aircraft decals, Claire held up a faded emblem, a set of stylized wings encircling the letters JM. Lucas turned from the tool chest and smiled. His initials? She nodded. He used to say everyone needed a symbol, a mark to remind them who they were trying to become. Lucas took it from her gently. Then we'll put it right under the left wing. That night, they painted the emblem together, crouched side by side beneath the fuselage. When it was done, they stood in silence, looking at the completed mark. I think he'd be proud, Claire whispered. Lucas looked at her. I think he already was. She turned, smiling. There was something different in her eyes now. Not just relief or clarity, but peace. You ever think we're not here to fix the past, she asked, but to finish it? Lucas stepped closer. No, but I do now. A few nights later, snow fell again. Gentler this time, more ceremonial than severe. Claire stood at the open hangar door, arms folded, watching flakes drift through the floodlights. Behind her, Lucas checked the final inspection sheet. We're ready, he said. Claire turned. For what? He motioned to the cockpit. The first engine test. Her eyes widened. Tonight? Why not? They climbed into the cockpit, seats worn but newly cushioned, switches labeled with careful hands. Lucas gave her the honor of flipping the master switch. The engine sputtered, then caught. The roar filled the hangar, vibrations humming through the steel bones of the plane and their very chests. Claire laughed, loud, unrestrained, a sound that startled even her. Lucas grinned. Still think flying's only for running away? She shook her head, breathless. Not anymore. They sat for a moment longer, engine idling, both of them staring ahead into the night. Not at the runway, but at what came next. The morning sky over the valley was a painter's dream. Pastel hues of rose and lavender brushing across the horizon, wisps of golden light threading through the snowy peaks. The garage, now a workshop reborn, sat bathed in that soft light like a cathedral of steel and memory. Inside, the plane gleamed beneath its own resurrection, fully assembled for the first time in decades. Lucas stood by the hangar doors, eyes on the narrow airstrip stretching out toward the tree line. He held a checklist in one hand, a worn rag in the other, though neither moved. His thoughts were miles away, flying ahead of the moment that was quickly approaching. Behind him, Claire descended the steps from the loft, a thermos in hand and nervous energy in her walk. She wore a thick jacket, earmuffs, and a look that mixed exhilaration with disbelief. Still time to back out, Lucas said, glancing over his shoulder. Claire smiled tightly. You say that like it's an option. He chuckled, folding the checklist. Fuel's good, weather's holding, engines purring like a mountain cat. She's ready. Claire approached the plane slowly, hand tracing its side. I never thought I'd see it like this, let alone be the one flying it. You sure you want to be in the cockpit? He asked gently. I can take her up first. Make sure everything holds. Claire looked at him with a steady gaze. Jack Monroe didn't leave this bird behind, so someone else could take the first flight. He trusted me, just like I'm trusting you. Lucas met her eyes and nodded. Then let's bring her home. The pre-flight process was reverent, almost ceremonial. Lucas performed a final walk around, while Claire climbed into the cockpit, adjusting the seat and harness. She ran her hands over the controls, her grandfather's notes committed to memory now. The sun crept higher, casting shadows through the trees that danced across the tarmac like spirits watching. Lucas joined her inside, settling into the co-pilot's seat. Their shoulders brushed, grounding them both in the now. Claire inhaled deeply. You ever think about how much had to happen for this to even be possible? Every day, Lucas said. One bad decision, one loose bolt, one person giving up, and none of this would have happened. But none of us did, she whispered. Lucas turned to her. Let's make it count. Claire flipped the master switch. The instrument panel blinked to life, gauges springing into motion. The propeller spun once, twice, then caught with a guttural growl that filled the hangar and shook the ground beneath them. Lucas watched her, every movement measured and confident. Throttle to 25, mixture rich, flaps set. She nodded, completing the motions. Her hands were steady, her eyes forward. This is for you, Grandpa, she murmured. Lucas caught the words but said nothing. They didn't need ceremony. The moment carried its own. They taxied slowly to the mouth of the runway, the snow-plowed path now flanked by tall evergreens like silent sentinels. Claire paused at the threshold. You ready? She asked. Lucas smiled. I've been ready since the day we found her. Claire pushed the throttle. The plane surged forward, wheels rattling against the uneven tarmac, wind tugging at their wings. The hum became a roar. Claire held the controls steady as speed climbed. 30, 40, 60, then lift. The moment the tires left the ground, time fractured. The world fell away, and they were flying, truly flying. The wings, once buried under dust and silence, now stretched into the heavens like they were always meant to. Claire let out a breathless laugh, one hand covering her mouth. Her eyes shone. Lucas whooped beside her. She's singing! Below, the valley unfolded like a postcard, white and gold and endless. The peaks of the Rockies stood sentinel in the distance, while rivers sparkled like ribbons of light. They climbed gently, leveling at 1,500 feet, the aircraft cruising with the grace of something both old and reborn. Claire turned to Lucas. You ever flown before? Once, with a crop duster who owed my dad money. She laughed. This isn't that. No, he said, eyes scanning the horizon. This is something else entirely. They circled the valley once, then again. Claire eased into a gentle bank, letting the wings tip like a nod to the sky. The radio crackled faintly with static, but they didn't speak much. The silence between them was full of reverence, of triumph, of something deeper than either had yet named. After 20 minutes, Claire guided the plane into its descent. The landing was smooth, wheels kissing the runway like an old promise kept. When they rolled to a stop, she cut the engine, and the roar faded into the wind. Lucas turned to her. You did it! Claire sat back, breathless, heart still racing. We did it! He reached over and squeezed her hand. They climbed out to find Marlene standing near the hangar with two others from town. Tommy from the gas station, and Mr. Denslow, the retired mailman who once flew supply runs in Alaska. Word had gotten out. Claire and Lucas didn't say anything. They just looked up at the plane, silhouetted against the morning sun, steam rising from its exhaust in slow curls. Mr. Denslow whistled low. That's a beauty. Lucas nodded. Took a few miracles. Claire smiled. And a lot of elbow grease. Marlene stepped forward and handed them 2 mugs of cocoa. Someone ought to write a book about this. Maybe someday, Lucas said. They stood together for a long while, watching as the sun climbed higher and the snow began to melt in small, glistening patches along the tarmac. Claire looked at Lucas. So what now? He paused, then glanced at the hangar. We keep flying. She tilted her head. Just us? Lucas shook his head. No, I was thinking, maybe we open the place up, offer restoration workshops, host aviation youth camps. Let other people find their wings here too. Claire's face softened, the future taking shape in her mind. Jack would have loved that. Lucas smiled. I think he already does. They walked back toward the hangar, hand in hand, the plane behind them gleaming like a monument to every choice, every risk, every broken thing they dared to fix. The wings had risen, and so had they. The day of the exhibition arrived like a long-awaited encore. Sunlight bathed the small airstrip in a mellow glow, the snow nearly gone save for pockets that glittered along the tree line. A light wind teased the American flag above the hangar door, making it flap lazily against the sky. Folding chairs, hay bales, and tables draped in checkered cloths lined the field where neighbors gathered, some with steaming cups of cider, others with worn caps in hand and pride in their eyes. For most, it was just a Saturday, but for Lucas and Claire, it was the culmination of legacy, labor, and love. The town had shown up in force. Families with children bundled in scarves, war veterans leaning on canes or one another, curious teens with aviation dreams scribbled in their notebooks. Even the mayor, a soft-spoken woman with a fondness for pie and progress, was there, wearing a scarf knit in red, white, and blue. Claire stood behind a modest podium set up beside the plane, now proudly polished and adorned with the JM insignia beneath its wing. Her fingers clutched a note card, but the words refused to settle. She looked up and caught Lucas's gaze, steady, reassuring. She cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming. I don't usually give speeches, but this one isn't just mine." She paused, eyes sweeping across the faces. This plane was built in silence, hidden, forgotten even. But it was never meant to disappear. It was meant to fly, and to remind us of the people who came before us and the courage it takes to keep moving forward when the past feels too heavy. A few heads nodded. My grandfather, Jack Monroe, flew missions no one recorded. He risked everything, and he made mistakes. He wasn't perfect, but he believed in what flight represented: freedom, redemption, second chances. And thanks to the hands of Joe Walker, in the heart of his son Lucas, this aircraft has a second life. Lucas shifted slightly, humbled by the mention. A soft murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. Claire smiled. Today's flight isn't just for Jack. It's for every story that's been buried, for every person who ever believed they were too broken to be remembered. We restored this plane not to dwell on what was lost, but to honor what remains, and to share what's possible. She stepped aside to applause that was more felt than loud. Slow, steady, heartfelt. Lucas climbed into the cockpit as Claire took the co-pilot's seat. The engine turned over with a steady purr, and the crowd quieted as the propeller blurred into motion. They taxied down the airstrip, the crowd rising to their feet. "Ready?" Lucas asked. Claire looked at him, her expression calm, resolute. "Always." With a gentle push of the throttle, they soared once more. Higher this time, more confident, as if the plane itself remembered its purpose. Cheers rose from below as they circled the field, wings dipping in a graceful arc. Children pointed. Veterans wiped their eyes. Somewhere in the back, Marlene held her phone high, live streaming the flight with tearful commentary. Inside the cockpit, Claire glanced out at the valley. The fields, the snow-tipped evergreens, the rooftops of homes that had long since become family. "This feels like closure," she said. Lucas shook his head. "No, it feels like a beginning." They banked gently, flying low enough for the crowd to see their silhouettes framed against the morning sky. Lucas guided the plane into a slow loop around the field. Beneath them, the garage stood open, a symbol of everything reborn. After 20 minutes in the sky, they eased back toward the runway. The landing was smooth, greeted by a wave of applause and hollers that echoed across the field. As the engine sputtered to a stop, Claire and Lucas stepped out, cheeks flushed, hands grease-streaked but firm in each other's. The mayor approached with a grin. "That was quite a show." Lucas shrugged. "Just honoring a promise." She nodded. "Well, you've inspired more than you know. There's talk already. Mentorship programs, aviation camps, partnerships with local schools?" Claire's eyes lit up. "Really? Really," the mayor said. "This could become something much bigger than a restored plane." Lucas and Claire exchanged a look. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned and the tables were cleared, Claire wandered into the garage alone. The quiet settled around her like an old coat. She paused in front of the photo they'd framed, Jack Monroe and Joe Walker, side by side, squinting into the sun. Between them sat a boy no older than 6, a wide grin on his face, clutching a model airplane. It was Lucas. Claire traced the edge of the frame with one finger. I think you both would have liked each other, she whispered. Behind her, Lucas stepped in. They already did. She turned. You knew about that picture? He nodded. Found it in a box a week ago. I was going to show you later. Claire stepped into his arms without needing to say more. He held her as the sun filtered through the garage windows, casting long golden beams that danced across the concrete floor. I'm not leaving this time, she said against his shoulder. I didn't think you would, he replied. She leaned back slightly to look at him. You still want to open that workshop? Yeah, he said, but only if you're my partner. Claire smiled, eyes shining. In every way that matters. They stood there as the shadows lengthened, the plane gleaming behind them. Not a monument, not a relic, but a beginning, a new legacy. Because some stories aren't about fixing the past. They're about flying forward, together. Spring arrived softly in the valley. The last traces of snow receded into memory, replaced by golden grass in the hum of new life. Trees budded along the ridgelines, and birds returned with songs that carried through the crisp morning air. What had once been a forgotten garage tucked beneath the mountains now stood proud with a fresh coat of paint, its doors open wide to the world, and to possibility. Inside, the space had transformed. Where dust and silence had once settled, light and motion now reigned. The plane, her skin polished to a soft silver sheen, sat proudly in the center, no longer just a relic, but a living story. Surrounding it were rows of workbenches, toolkits, and walls lined with photographs. Vintage aircraft, smiling pilots, and faded clippings of Jack Monroe's long-lost missions now restored in honor. Above the entrance, a new sign hung with simple dignity. Monroe Walker Aviation Center Restoring Wings. Inspiring flight. Claire stood near the doorway, clipboard in hand, watching a group of teenagers gather around Lucas, who was demonstrating how to rivet an aluminum patch onto a wing section. The kids listened with a blend of curiosity and awe, their eyes wide, hands fidgeting with borrowed gloves and goggles. She smiled. It had been just 6 weeks since the town voted to support their vision, a nonprofit center offering aviation education to underprivileged youth, veterans, and anyone who had ever looked up at the sky and wondered, what if? Funding had come from unexpected places, an anonymous grant from a former pilots association, a small federal program for vocational training, even personal donations from locals who simply believed. Lucas glanced up mid-demo and caught Claire's eye. He winked. Her heart fluttered in that quiet, grounded way it always did when she saw him like this. Confident, gentle, and alive with purpose. She walked over just as the lesson wrapped. How's the crew? She asked. Lucas handed a wrench to a freckled girl in oversized overalls. Bright, eager. One of them asked if they could sleep in the hangar. Claire laughed. Should we start drawing up bunk beds? He leaned close. Only if you're building them with me. She grinned. Deal. They stepped away from the group as Marlene bustled in carrying a tray of sandwiches. Don't let these kids work on empty stomachs, she called, setting the tray down like she owned the place. Claire turned to Lucas. Do you think he'd be proud? Your dad? Lucas looked around the garage. I think he'd say we're finally using the place right. Claire nodded, her voice soft. And Jack? Lucas took her hand. He's flying again. That's all he ever wanted. They stood in silence a moment, taking it in. Then Claire motioned toward the back room. Come with me. She led him to the far wall, where a sheet hung over a framed display. She reached up, pulled it down, and stepped aside. Lucas stared. It was a collage. 2 center photos side by side. One of Jack Monroe, hand resting on a cockpit, eyes squinting into sunlight. The other, Joe Walker, seated on a hangar stool with a socket wrench in hand, sleeves rolled up, expression calm and kind. Between them, a bronze plaque read, To the men who carried wings in their hearts and stories in their silence. You taught us that flight begins not in the sky, but in courage. Lucas swallowed hard. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, Claire said. They started this. We just finished it. He turned to her, emotion thick in his chest. Claire, she smiled. I know. That evening, after the last student had gone home and the tools were cleaned and stacked, Claire and Lucas sat on the steps of the hangar, mugs of cocoa warming their hands. The sun sank behind the ridge, painting the sky in deep blues and tangerine. "So," Lucas said, "what's next?" Claire leaned against his shoulder. "Tomorrow, a tour group of retired Air Force engineers. Next week, our first overnight workshop. And next month, we unveil the second plane." He chuckled. "We really are doing this." "We are," she said, then added, "and I want to keep doing it. With you." Lucas turned to her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not going anywhere this time, right?" "Only up," she whispered. He kissed her then, gently, deeply, under the sky that had once divided them, now stitched together by love, forgiveness, and the roar of rebuilt engines. When they pulled apart, Claire laughed softly. "What would Jack say if he saw us now?" Lucas grinned. "Probably something like, 'Don't stall in the climb.'" They sat together until the stars blinked awake above them. Behind them, the hangar glowed from within, soft golden light spilling out onto the gravel like a promise. And somewhere high above, where cold air met quiet space, two spirits flew side by side again, finally home. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on this story. Did it move you? Did it remind you of someone you've loved or something you've lost and found again? If this story touched your heart and you'd like to hear more tales of healing, hope, and unexpected love, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Until next time, take care and keep believing in second chances.